Alex, thank you, and Senator Murray, thank you for bringing us together, and thank you more broadly for your leadership in making sure that the resources of the country are appropriated in a nonpartisan way that meets the needs of all Americans. It is good to be with you, although I regret the occasion that brings us together. We are witnessing a politically motivated, total zeroing out of crucial federal funding for Army Corps projects in California and other blue states to funnel funding towards projects in red states. It is as simple and as ugly and as blatant a political move as that. This move to eliminate essential funding for projects with the simple intention these projects have of saving lives and preventing floods. This action threatens millions of people from both parties and puts lives at risk. This is deeply personal for all of us and our states. In the case of California, we face natural disasters year-round, and the Army Corps plays a vital response role in assisting states before, during, and after.
All right, folks, buckle up, because today we are diving into another episode of Political Theater brought to you by none other than Senator Adam Schiff. Yes, the same Adam Schiff who brought us endless impeachment drama, partisan attacks, and now apparently a lecture on how to be president. He just dropped a video titled, "You Can't Be a Half President." It's packed full of emotional appeals, cherry-picked statistics, and, frankly, a lot of misinformation wrapped up in the typical blue states, our victim's narrative. So let's break this down patriot to patriot and expose what's really going on here. So, according to Schiff, President Trump, or really any Republican administration, is supposedly cutting off disaster funding to blue states just because they vote Democrat. Really, Adam? You want us to believe that the federal government is purposefully putting people at risk to punish blue states? That is serious.
After natural disasters. Yet in California, we're seeing over $125 million in cuts to flood prevention projects. With the administration's Army Corps funding plan, 2/3 of the budget will support projects in red states and only 1/3 will support projects in blue states. In California, it is flood protection projects that are completely zeroed out in this budget as part of the total $1.5 billion in cuts to Army Corps construction funding. The termination of projects like these is especially concerning given that their purpose is to protect communities and, in particular, at-risk frontline communities. The projects that were underway but now have been cut are in place to protect these communities against flood risk. This includes 4 significant flood prevention projects in California. One of the projects that my colleague Senator Padilla referenced to lose funding is Sacramento's Natomas Basin. The Army Corps describes it as, quote, one of the most at-risk areas in the nation for catastrophic flooding. This is what the president would zero out, one of the most at-risk areas in the nation. Another project zeroed out the West Sacramento Levee Project. This is an area that encompasses 2 basins, has a population of 48,000 residents, and surrounds vital infrastructure, including postal service centers, Department of Water Resources flood fight facilities, CHP Academy, the Port of West Sacramento, and others. This location, the Corps has said, has, quote, a high probability of flooding due to its location, and now that project won't get the funding that it needs. The Pajaro River Flood Risk Management Project was previously set to receive the funding it needed to provide 100-year flood risk reduction to the city of Watsonville and the town of Pajaro. That has now been cut. Pajaro, as many of you may know, was the scene of that tragic flood because of a lack of investment. And finally, Pajaro would get investment, and the administration is cutting it. In 2023, a flood devastated hundreds of homes, and this project was intended to remedy how vulnerable this community is to further disaster. The San Joaquin River Basin Project is another critical project addressing significant flood risks in the Central Valley. These flood prevention projects were set to gain the funding they needed, but now it's our most at-risk Americans that will pay the price for these chaotic threats to cancel funding. We're not going to stand by as they plan out this roadmap that includes drastic and harmful cuts. Natural disasters don't discriminate based on whether a state is red or blue, and the administration and Congress shouldn't either when it comes to protecting communities from natural disaster. This puts us on a very dangerous path, a path where anything can be on the chopping block for a partisan reason. Today it's funding for these projects. Tomorrow could be another form of funding meant to save lives. There will be a domino effect of threats aimed at blue states. When you're elected to be president of the United States, you're not a half president. You're not president for only half of the country, not if you do the job right. These baseless attacks threaten millions of people from both parties whose lives are endangered by floods. We need to remind the administration that a state may be blue or red, but it contains millions of people who are both blue and red. It's clear the Trump administration is politicizing the Army Corps and its critical mission to provide resources and stability to communities and states. When the fires broke out in LA earlier this year, we saw threats from the president and the administration to cut funding to California to help these communities rebuild. And during this time, we also saw the president order the release of water from 2 California reservoirs, water that could not and did not reach Los Angeles. The release was done by Doge, quote, to satisfy Trump, unquote. That's what the Army Corps said about the order to waste billions of gallons of water from California reservoirs, all for a photo op. It was dangerous because it could have led to flooding, and now we're seeing funding cuts to flood prevention projects aimed at protecting our communities. When people need help, we help them. When people are fighting to rebuild, we help them rebuild. And when people need protection from flooding, we assure funding is in place so they're protected. No matter who the president is, no matter who's in charge of Congress, no matter who the governor is or who the senators are, no matter what state it is or what color of the state, this cannot and should not change. If this continues and we don't stand up, this administration will continue to single out blue states for less protection for all of their citizens. To those of us who experience disaster in our states, and it's all of us, we must show a sense of urgency. Because when disaster strikes and the floods rise, the only thing that matters is whether or not your government has been there for you when you needed it. People don't have time for partisan political games. We cannot allow another community or another state to be the target of cruel, unwarranted budget cuts and complete neglect at the hands of this administration. Thank you.
Accusation, and it's completely unfounded. Let's start with the basic principle. The federal government should be prioritizing projects that are most needed and most efficient, period. The Army Corps of Engineers doesn't base their budget on how California votes. They base it on what projects have the highest risk-to-benefit ratio. And if California politicians have maintained their own flood infrastructure or can't manage water policies, whose fault is that? Not Washington's. California has a massive state budget. Why is it always the federal government's job to bail them out? If Sacramento has the money for high-speed rail projects, sanctuary cities, and climate summits, then they can fund their own levees and water management. California is constantly acting like a neglected stepchild. Meanwhile, it's one of the wealthiest states in the country. They've got Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and billions flowing in from tech and media. But somehow, every time there's a flood, fire, or drought, it's Washington's fault. And let's not forget, California's wildfires and floods, largely preventable. These disasters are made worse by mismanagement, environmental regulations gone wild, and refusal to clear dead brush or properly maintain dams and waterways. But Schiff wants to blame President Trump? Let's talk about the real danger here, not flooding, but the politicization of emergency response. Schiff's entire message is a veiled accusation that Trump is using disaster relief as a weapon against Democrats. That's a dangerous narrative to spread. It erodes trust in federal agencies and disrespects the hardworking men and women of the Army Corps who risk their lives helping communities rebuild no matter what party they vote for. Schiff says, you can't be a half president. Well, Adam, how about this? You can't be a half senator either. You can't spend years dividing this country, pushing false narratives and demonizing half America, and then suddenly pretend you care about unity. President Trump didn't ignore California. He visited after wildfires, offered resources, and pushed for forest management. What did California officials do? Mocked him and refused to cooperate. That's not leadership. That's arrogance. You want to talk about where the funding goes? Let's talk about responsibility. Red states tend to have balanced budgets, lower taxes, and more responsible spending. When they get hit by disasters, like hurricanes in Florida or tornadoes in Oklahoma, they don't cry foul or demand special treatment. They rebuild and move forward. Meanwhile, blue states keep spending beyond their means and expect Uncle Sam to foot the bill. That's not how a republic works. That's not federalism. And that's not fair to the millions of Americans in other states who are managing just fine without constant handouts. This speech isn't about protecting Californians. It's about protecting Schiff's narrative. It's about demonizing Trump and setting the stage for future elections. Schiff is using disaster victims as political pawns, and that's disgraceful. I'll say it again, we're one nation under God, but we're also a nation of states. Each state has a responsibility to manage its own affairs. And if a state fails, yes, we help, but we don't reward failure with endless federal dollars while they push radical policies that put their citizens at even more risk. To Senator Schiff, if you want to talk about leadership, look in the mirror. Leadership isn't finger-pointing. It's taking responsibility. It's cleaning up your own state before accusing others of neglect. To my fellow Americans left, right, or center, don't fall for this manipulative rhetoric. Demand accountability from your local officials. Ask where your tax dollars are going. And never let politicians use disaster victims to score cheap political points. We stand for truth. We stand for American values. And we stand for a federal government that serves all of us, not just the loudest voices in Washington. United States, God bless you. God bless our troops. And God bless the United States of America.